Hi, I'm Steve Clemens, and I have a question. As long as U.S. support continues, is there anything that can stop Israel's highly destructive assault on Gaza from just going on indefinitely? Let's get to the bottom line. Nothing has changed, at least on the surface, in blanket U.S. support for Israel since October 7th. The U.S. is still supplying Israel with heavy munitions and still blocking just about every attempt to impose. Hi, I'm Steve Clemens, and I have a question. As long as U.S. support continues, is there anything that can stop Israel's highly destructive assault on Gaza from just going on indefinitely? Let's get to the bottom line. Nothing has changed, at least on the surface, in blanket U.S. support for Israel since October 7th. The U.S. is still supplying Israel with heavy munitions and still blocking just about every attempt to impose international sanctions on Israel at the UN, as the war in Gaza grinds now into its fourth month, with tens of thousands of Palestinians killed or maimed, most of them being women and children who are innocents in this conflict. Israeli leaders say this asymmetrical war must go on indefinitely in the aftermath of Hamas' surprise attack last October. And so far, Washington has given counsel, reportedly strong and emphatic counsel, to avoid civilian casualties. But at the same time, President Joe Biden has not demanded a ceasefire, even as malnutrition sets in and millions of people have nowhere to go. Israel's leadership seems to be ignoring most of what they are hearing from the White House. So where's the U.S. strategy for the region heading? Or perhaps better yet, where should it be heading? Today, we're talking with Aaron David Miller, who worked on U.S. Middle East policy at the State Department for 25 years. He's now a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and he's also author of The Much Too Promised Land, America's Elusive Search for Arab-Israeli Peace.
Do you want to make a great impression on your customers?
Manufacturing in China is already as tough as finishing.
It's great to be with you, to look on the much too promised land, and the notion about Arab-Israeli peace may sound like fantasy at this moment. And I just want to start asking you about what looks to me kind of like a quagmire of sorts right now, and whether or not you see it the same way, and whether you see an off-ramp.
First of all, Steve, thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you. Look, I think Israelis and Palestinians, and let's be clear, you've got never in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have we entered a phase of terror and violence, exponential rise of deaths both on October 7 and in the punishing Israeli airstrikes in an effort, and ground campaign in an effort to eradicate, destroy, degrade Hamas. This goes beyond anything Israelis and Palestinians have witnessed. It is in the process of traumatizing both communities. And right now, I think both are in a strategic cul-de-sac. There may be a way out of this, but it's going to leave the prospects for a stable, secure, prosperous Gaza and the possibilities of a conflict-ending solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Choosing my words very carefully, a conflict-ending solution. It's going to be a heavier lift than ever before, and we're farther away from the prospects of creating the kind of environment that is required to negotiate such an outcome. So we're in a long, dark tunnel, and right now it's hard to see a quick or easy way out.
You have been engaged with negotiations between Israel and Palestine for most of your working life, a big portion of it. You, after the Clinton administration term that you served, you were very frustrated with the situation. You said one of the mistakes we've made is that we too often acted as Israel's lawyers in this. In this conflict, we're asking as Israel's munitions supply, its armament supply. Are we too deployed on one side of the equation to have credibility on both?
The question of is this too much? Is it not enough? Is the right? Have we struck the right balance? The reality is, given where we were on October 6th, given the president's persona, he alone among modern American presidents has this deep and abiding commitment, certainly not to the Netanyahu government, but to the idea of Israel, the people of Israel, security of Israel. Given the politics, in which he's trying to navigate a very difficult line between a Republican Party, frankly, that has emerged as the Israel Can Do No Wrong Party, and a Democratic Party that is deeply divided, pressing him not only by progressives, but even mainstream Democrats to impose some measure of cost and accountability on Israel. Given his persona, the politics, and the cruel reality, Steve, that frankly, on the three core issues of this conflict, how to destroy Hamas or degrade it without wreaking injurious havoc on the Palestinians, number one, how to surge humanitarian assistance into a free fire zone, and what to do about the day after and the day after the day after. I think the president's leverage, frankly, is undermined to some degree by the fact that we don't have any better answers right now than the Israelis do on these three questions. So I think if you had to ask me where I think Joe Biden would have taken U.S. policy in the wake of the terror surge of October 7, I would say we're about where I would predict he would be. There'll be no open breach, in my judgment, with the Netanyahu government. I think the president, frankly, has done some good things. I don't think there'll be a scintilla of assistance into Gaza had it not been for tremendous pressure on the part of the U.S. on the Israelis. I don't think there would have been any hostages released had it not been for the personal intervention of the president. And I think by now, if reports are true that in the first several days in the wake of October 7th, the Israelis were prepared to preempt against Hezbollah in the north, I think by now, without the Biden administration's intercession, we might have had a regional escalation by now. Has the president veered too far in terms of identifying closely with the Israelis? No. I think if there's any course correction, it's the failure of the administration and the president himself to demonstrate the same kind of regard, empathy, and sympathy for the exponential rise of Palestinian deaths and the humanitarian disaster that is now not just looming, that is unfolding in Gaza. The fact is, we could have done a better job lawyering, if you want to use, and that's Kissinger's conceit, by the way. Israel's lawyer, I resurrected it for Jim Baker from Kissinger's memoirs. Baker loved it. And it is absolutely true that in the course of negotiations, certainly at Camp David, and I would count myself among those who I think failed to understand that if you were going to try to figure out a way to create a conflict-ending solution, you're going to have to take more seriously the needs and requirements of both sides. And I don't think we did that at Camp David. And I think that's a real challenge, given the nature of the U.S.-Israeli relationship, for any administration.
Advice for university presidents, for people who are out there trying to comment and talk and navigate what has become one of the most costly conversations to some careers that you can imagine. I've been very taken with something Bernie Steinberg, who was the executive director of the Hillel Group in Harvard from 1993 to 2010, wrote in Harvard's paper in which he said, it is not anti-Semitic to demand justice for all Palestinians living in their ancestral land. Smearing one's opponents is rarely a tactic employed by those confident that justice is on their side. What is not happening from your perspective in America's university establishment that they might be able to talk about the victims on the Israeli side, the victims on the Palestinian side, and how to navigate a course that's better? What do you see going on there, and what would you advise them?
It requires an enormous amount of inner strength, I think. And you have to separate yourself very often from the majority in order to educate yourself on the tragedies, the sensibilities, the sensitivities, the historical woundings that have occurred to both sides. It's hard to do that. And it's harder to then assert the fact that this is Goethe's definition, maybe of a tragedy. Two legitimate narratives that somehow cannot find a way to reconcile, and yet they must. So I'm not sure I have any unsolicited advice other than to detach yourself from the narrow anger and those who have any number of agendas that they want to follow through on, and think this through for yourself. Imagine the Israeli-Palestinian problem as an unassembled jigsaw puzzle on your living room floor.
Right.
Read as widely as you can. Talk to people outside of your immediate circle, and move outside of your comfort zone. I think that's the only way. And I'm not terribly hopeful and optimistic in this environment that that's going to be so easy, given the anger and hostility that this conflict has generated.
Well, I have always known you to be candid, and you are candid today. Aaron David Miller, former U.S. mediator for Arab-Israeli negotiations, now a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Steve, it's a pleasure, and thanks for having me.
So what's the bottom line? In the centers of power in the U.S. and Europe, the collective West, no one is willing to think that there's an alternative path to the flattening and the gutting of Palestinian lives and land. In fact, they're still arguing that it's vital. If that weren't the case, Israel would be acting differently. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has personal reasons, other than military ones, to stretch out this war. Plus, he knows that President Biden's first term is going to end this year, and nobody knows if he's still going to be president after that. And there are no other parties other than the U.S. who have real influence in the world and are willing to use it. So what does Washington go and do with that influence? Ask Israel not to kill innocent people with the weapons it keeps supplying to keep this war running? This is a crazy equation, one where we're going to look back ashamed of what we all let go on for way too long. And that's the bottom line.